People don't die because of their wounds. They die because someone else decided their life wasn't worth saving. That's the truth nobody wants to say out loud, and tonight, that truth screamed in fluorescent lights above the emergency room. Her name was Dr. Maya Carter. But on that night, as she staggered into her own hospital, bleeding from a car accident just blocks away, she wasn't doctor. She wasn't director. She was just another anonymous black body in pain, vulnerable and powerless under the cold stare of a white physician who had already made up his mind. Dr. Richard Hale didn't even look at her face long enough to register recognition. He saw the color of her skin first, and that was enough. He dismissed her symptoms with a curl of his lip, as if her agony was staged, as if her desperate gasps for breath were somehow less urgent than the complaints of the wealthy, white man waiting behind her. "Take her to county. We don't have space for her here," he said to the nurse. His voice was flat, bureaucratic, like he was reciting a line from a script. The nurse froze. The ER was busy, but there was space. They both knew it. She glanced back at Maya, who was gripping the edge of the gurney, her nails turning white from the pressure, her gown already soaked with blood. Maya wanted to scream her title, her authority, the weight of her position in this very building. But her throat was clogged with the taste of iron and smoke. Her ribs ached, her vision blurred, and deeper than the physical pain was something far more cutting. The realization that in this exact moment, stripped of her coat, her nameplate, her power, she was invisible. Not invisible, disposable. The golden light from a street lamp outside leaked through the blinds, cutting a sharp line across her face. She locked eyes with the nurse, silently begging, daring her to act. But fear clamped down on the nurse's body like chains. Fear of challenging Hale. Fear of losing her job. Fear of being next. The stretcher wheels squeaked against the tile as an orderly prepared to push her away. The humiliation was salt in her wounds. Her own hospital. Her own emergency room. And still, her skin tone carried more weight than her years of service, her sacrifice, her authority. Maya's mind replayed the hundreds of meetings she had sat through, warning the board about systemic bias, begging them to address the silent infection eating away at their care. Tonight, that infection had a face, and his name was Dr. Hale. Her lips parted. The words were cracked, faint, but sharp enough to pierce through the air. "You will regret this." The nurse flinched. Hale's expression barely changed, but for the briefest moment, his jaw tightened, like he had heard something he didn't want to admit mattered. Still, he waved his hand again. "Get her out of here." And just like that, the story began. Maya woke hours later in a different hospital, patched together by strangers who didn't recognize her, but who still valued her humanity enough to treat her. Her body ached, but her mind was ablaze. She didn't die that night, but something inside her was reborn. The pain became clarity. The humiliation became fuel. The betrayal became a mission. Because this wasn't just about her. It was about every patient dismissed, every diagnosis delayed, every mother lost in childbirth, every voice ignored because of the skin it came from. Hale thought he had turned her away. What he really did was awaken her resolve to burn down the rot that had been festering in the walls of her own institution. And in a bitter twist, the man who had denied her care had no idea he had done it to the very woman who signed his paycheck. What followed in the days after would test Maya's strength, her patience, and her heart. For while vengeance whispered seductively in her ear, what she truly craved was justice. Not just for herself but for every life stolen by prejudice disguised as professionalism. She returned to her hospital not as a victim, but as a storm. The staff whispered when she walked past, the limp in her stride a visible scar of the night their system failed her. Some avoided her eyes. Some bowed their heads in shame. And Hale looked at her like a man watching his own noose being tied. The confrontation was inevitable. But before that moment came, Maya had to fight through more than just her rage. She had to wrestle with questions of forgiveness, of leadership, of how to dismantle an entire culture of silence without destroying the very institution she had spent her life building. And in that crucible, she discovered the deepest truth of all. Sometimes justice isn't about punishing one man. It's about forcing the world to see what it has chosen to ignore, no matter how blinding the light might be. The battle lines were drawn. The boardroom was colder than the emergency room had been. Not in temperature, but in spirit. The polished wood table gleamed under fluorescent lights, and the leather chairs creaked as the members shifted uncomfortably, waiting for her to speak. Maya didn't rush. She let the silence build, heavy and suffocating, because silence was the same weapon they had wielded against her for years. Now it was hers. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, almost calm, though every syllable carried the weight of betrayal. 3 nights ago, I came through our emergency doors after a collision that could have killed me. Do you know what happened? She let her eyes sweep across the room, pausing on each face, daring someone to interrupt. Nobody did. I was denied treatment. Not because we lacked resources. Not because my injuries were minor. I was denied because of the color of my skin. A murmur rippled through the board. Some shifted in guilt, some in disbelief, some in the reflexive denial that had protected them for so long. She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. And the man responsible is sitting in this very institution, wearing a white coat, drawing a salary that this hospital pays him. Her voice sharpened. Dr. Richard Hale. The name struck like a hammer. A few members avoided her gaze entirely, as if looking at the grain of the table could shield them from complicity. Others raised their brows, feigning surprise, though she could see the flicker of recognition in their eyes. They had heard stories. They had simply chosen not to listen. One board member, an older man with a silver tie pin, cleared his throat. Dr. Carter, with all due respect, these are very serious allegations. Surely there must have been some misunderstanding. Perhaps in the chaos of the ER, chaos doesn't discriminate. Maya cut him off. People do. Her voice cracked, just slightly, but she didn't hide it. She wanted them to hear the pain beneath her composure. I wasn't mistaken. I wasn't confused. I looked into his eyes, and I saw it. He dismissed me before I even opened my mouth. The silence thickened again. Another member finally spoke, a woman with sharp glasses and an even sharper tone. Maya, if this is true, it is unacceptable. But we need evidence. Documentation. Witnesses. Otherwise, his word against yours could divide this hospital even further. Divide. Maya's laugh was hollow. Do you really think we are united now? We are fractured, bleeding, and we've been patching the cracks with silence and denial. Hale is not the disease, he is the symptom. The disease is the culture that allows him to walk these halls unchecked. Her words echoed, bouncing against the sterile walls. For a moment, she saw something flicker in their eyes, not agreement. Not yet, but discomfort deep enough to force reflection. She pressed on. You wanted evidence? Fine. The nurse who froze that night, the orderly who wheeled me away, the security cameras that saw me turned out of my own, they are all evidence. But let's not pretend we don't already know the truth. We have ignored complaints for years, patients who felt unheard, families who filed grievances, and we buried it in paperwork because facing it was inconvenient. The woman with glasses shifted uneasily. What are you proposing? I'm proposing we stop pretending this is about one man. I want a full audit of our ER cases from the last 5 years. Patterns of treatment delays, misdiagnosis, patient complaints. I want implicit bias training mandated for every staff member. And I want a disciplinary hearing for Hale. Her voice dropped, low and deliberate. And this time, we will not bury it. The boardroom was quiet again, but this silence was different. Not avoidance, but calculation. The kind of silence that precedes change or war. Maya sat back, her chest rising and falling steadily. She knew she had shaken them, but shaking was not enough. She needed to break something open. Later that night, she stood in the corridor outside the ER, the place where it had happened. The hum of machines, the faint scent of antiseptic, the hurried footsteps, it was all the same, yet everything was different. The nurses whispered when she passed, their eyes darting toward Hale's office door. She stopped at the nurse's station. Where is he? She asked softly. One of the younger nurses hesitated, then pointed. In his office. He's been quieter since the meeting. Maya nodded. She walked to the door, every step measured, her heart pounding, but her face calm. She knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. Hale looked up from his desk. He was pale, his jaw tight, his hands clasped so firmly that the knuckles were white. For the first time, Maya saw something in his eyes she hadn't before, fear. Maya, he said, forcing a thin smile. I was going to come see you. I heard you've been recovering well. She shut the door behind her. Stop. Her voice was quiet but sharp enough to slice through the air. We both know why I'm here. He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. Look, if things were chaotic that night. You know how it is in the ER. We make quick judgments. It wasn't personal. It was exactly personal. She stepped closer. You didn't see a patient. You saw a skin color. And you decided that was enough to send me away. His jaw twitched. You're twisting this. I was making a clinical decision. No. She cut in, her voice rising. You were making a racist decision. Don't dress it up in clinical terms. Don't hide behind chaos. You looked at me and decided I wasn't worth your time. That could have killed me. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the silence. Finally, he broke. I didn't know it was you. Maya froze. The words hung between them like a poison. So if you had known I was the director, you would have treated me? That's your defense. His eyes flickered. He realized his mistake too late. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Do you understand what you've just admitted? You've confessed that the only reason you might have valued my life was because of my title. Not because I was human. Not because I was dying. But because I was powerful. Hale's mouth opened, then closed. He had no defense. Maya leaned over his desk, her eyes locked onto his. Your career, your reputation, your licensure, all hanging by a thread. And you tied the knot yourself. She turned and walked toward the door. But before she left, she paused. This isn't just about you anymore, Richard. This is about every patient who never had the chance to confront the person who dismissed them. You will answer for them too. The door clicked shut behind her. Word spread quickly, not because Maya announced it, but because hospitals are small worlds, full of whispers and watchful eyes. Staff spoke in hushed tones about the director's confrontation with Hale, about the board meeting, about the possibility that for the first time, the walls might not protect the powerful. Some were afraid, some were hopeful, and some were angry, furious that she would drag their hospital's name into the mud. But Maya didn't flinch. For the first time in years, she felt clarity. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every patient who had walked in scared and walked out ignored. A week later, the disciplinary hearing began. Hale sat at one end of the long table, his lawyer beside him. Maya sat at the other, not just as the victim, but as the director overseeing the process. It was a conflict of interest, the lawyer argued. She couldn't be both accuser and judge. But Maya had anticipated that. She had stepped back from her role on the panel, recusing herself, but her presence in the room was undeniable, a reminder that this wasn't just paperwork, it was personal. Witnesses came forward. The nurse who froze. The orderly who wheeled her away. Even a patient's family member who had overheard Hale's dismissal that night. Piece by piece, the facade Hale had built around himself began to crumble. His lawyer argued bias, misinterpretation, stress. But the weight of the stories pressed down harder and harder. And through it all, Maya sat silently, her face unreadable, her eyes never leaving him. She wasn't there for revenge. She was there for truth. The truth was harder than anyone wanted to admit. The hearing room smelled faintly of paper and coffee, the kind of scent that clung to bureaucratic spaces where decisions shaped lives but rarely acknowledged souls. The blinds were drawn, shutting out the daylight, leaving the fluorescent lights to cast everyone in a pale, almost sickly glow. It was fitting, Maya thought. This was a place where truths often came out looking diseased. The chair of the disciplinary panel, Dr. Eleanor Shaw, adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. Dr. Hale, you've heard the accounts. We've listened to multiple witnesses corroborate that you dismissed Dr. Carter's treatment without medical justification. Do you have anything else you wish to say before we deliberate? Hale shifted in his chair. He looked smaller now, the swagger of his white coat stripped away. His tie was loosened, his face blotched with sweat. His lawyer had been whispering frantically into his ear for the last 30 minutes, urging restraint, urging control. But restraint was a luxury Hale had already squandered. He leaned forward, his voice tight. I've dedicated 20 years to this hospital. I've saved countless lives, worked impossible shifts, sacrificed more than most people in this room could imagine. And now, because of one misunderstanding, I'm being painted as some kind of villain? This isn't just a site's a witch hunt. A murmur rippled across the room. Maya's eyes never left him. She kept her face composed, but inside, the words clawed at her. Misunderstanding. Witch hunt. The phrases of men who had never once faced the mirror without excuses. The chair raised a hand. Dr. Hale, no one questions your years of service. But this case is not about dedication, it's about discrimination. We are tasked with determining whether your actions reflected bias, conscious or unconscious, that endangered a patient's life. Hale's lawyer stood, smoothing his suit jacket. Madam Chair, we must be careful. Accusations of racism carry immense weight. To destroy a man's career over a single incident without concrete proof of intent is reckless. Medicine is chaotic. Decisions must be made quickly. To expect perfection is unrealistic. Maya finally spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, but it carried across the room with the authority of someone who had carried both scalpel and truth. Perfection is not the expectation. Humanity is. The bar is not set at flawless, it's set at fair. And Dr. Hale did not meet it. Not with me, and not with others. The lawyer turned, his expression sharp. Others? Maya nodded slowly. I asked for an audit of ER cases. The preliminary results are in. In the past 5 years, Black patients in this hospital waited, on average, 37% longer for treatment than white patients. Complaints from minority patients were dismissed or unresolved at double the rate. And the physician most often named in those complaints was Dr. Hale. The room froze. Hale's face drained of color. His lawyer sputtered. That's circumstantial. Statistics don't prove intent. They prove a pattern, Maya interrupted. And patterns kill. For a moment, the silence was absolute. Even the air felt heavier, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Dr. Shaw finally spoke, her voice measured. We will recess to deliberate. She struck the gavel softly, but the sound reverberated like a gunshot. As the panel filed out, the room dissolved into whispers. Staff members exchanged glances, some shocked, some grimly unsurprised. The press hadn't been allowed inside, but Maya knew the walls of this room wouldn't contain the truth for long. Whispers had wings. When the room emptied, Maya found herself standing alone by the window, staring at the blinds. Her reflection stared back tired eyes, a thin scar still healing on her cheek, the faintest tremor in her hands. She pressed her palms against the cool glass, grounding herself. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Careful, director. You're making enemies you can't afford. She swallowed hard. The pressure was already building. By the time she left the building, reporters were waiting. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, voices clamoring. We cannot call ourselves healers if we refuse to confront the sickness within our own walls. The cameras clicked. The microphones leaned closer. But she said no more. She descended the steps, her shoulders straight, her stride steady, though inside her chest, her heart pounded like a drum. That night, she barely slept. The media storm had begun, and with it came both allies and adversaries. Emails flooded her inbox, some thanking her, others condemning her. Messages of solidarity mixed with threats. One subject line simply read, "Shut up or bleed again." She forwarded the threats to security, but the words still lingered in her mind. They reminded her that racism wasn't confined to ER walls. It lived in neighborhoods, in boardrooms, in inboxes. It was everywhere, a shadow stretching longer than she could measure. The next morning, she walked back into the hospital. Eyes followed her down the hallway, some respectful, some resentful. A young resident stopped her near the elevators. His voice was nervous but earnest. "Dr. Carter, I just wanted to say, thank you. My mother was treated here last year, and she told me she felt invisible the whole time. What you're doing, it matters." Her throat tightened. She nodded, squeezing his shoulder gently before stepping into the elevator. Moments like that reminded her why she had to keep going, no matter the threats. The panel reconvened later that week. Hale sat stiffly, his lawyer's mask of confidence slipping. The air was taut with anticipation. Dr. Shaw cleared her throat. After reviewing the testimony, evidence, and statistical data, the panel has reached a decision. We find that Dr. Hale's actions on the night in question, as well as his documented history, constitute a violation of medical ethics and patient rights. Effective immediately, Dr. Hale is suspended pending review by the state medical board. Gasps filled the room. Hale's lawyer jumped to his feet, protesting. Hale himself looked as if the ground had given way beneath him. His eyes darted to Maya, filled with a venom that barely masked his desperation. "This isn't over," he hissed under his breath as he passed her on the way out. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't need to respond. His fall had already begun. But she knew he was right in one sense: it wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. Because the moment Hale's suspension hit the news, the hospital became a battlefield. Protesters gathered outside, some demanding change, others defending Hale, waving signs that read, "Don't ruin a good doctor," and "Stop playing the race card." Inside, the staff was divided. Some rallied behind Maya, inspired by her courage. Others whispered that she was tearing the hospital apart, that her fight for justice was costing them their peace. The pressure mounted. The hospital's board called an emergency session. Funding donors began asking questions. Politicians sniffed opportunity. And Maya found herself at the center of a storm far bigger than one man's prejudice. But storms didn't scare her. Not anymore. That night, she walked through the empty halls of her hospital, listening to the echo of her own footsteps. She paused at the ER doors, the same doors she had entered bleeding and broken not long ago. She pressed her hand against the glass. "This place will not kill me," she whispered to herself. "It will change because of me." And with that vow burning inside her, she turned and walked back into the fight. The storm did not quiet. It grew louder, heavier, more relentless with every passing day. News outlets camped outside the hospital. Every headline carried Maya's name. Every editorial demanded she be either celebrated as a hero or condemned as a troublemaker. Her face was splashed across screens, her story dissected by people who had never set foot in her ER, people who treated her pain like entertainment. But Maya refused to hide. She walked through those hospital doors every morning with her head high, even when protesters jeered, even when staff members turned away. If she faltered now, everything she had fought for would collapse into dust. Hale, meanwhile, had become a martyr in the eyes of some. Certain media voices painted him as the victim, a dedicated doctor destroyed by political correctness. Interviews with his former patients flooded the airwaves, white patients praising his skill, swearing he had saved their lives. The narrative shifted daily: hero or villain, savior or sinner. And yet beneath the noise, the truth remained. He had failed her, and he had failed others. The data didn't lie. Still, Maya knew numbers alone wouldn't change hearts. People didn't move because of charts, they moved because of stories. And so she told hers again and again. To reporters, to students, to community leaders. She relived that night over and over, peeling her scars open so that others could see the infection underneath. It hurt every time, but pain was the price of change. Then came the threat that made her pause. It was late, her office quiet, the glow of her desk lamp casting shadows across stacks of files. She opened a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph of her house, taken from across the street. Underneath, scrawled in thick black ink, "You won't survive the next mistake." Her hands trembled, but only for a moment. Fear was familiar, almost expected, but she would not let it chain her. She reported it, secured her home, and doubled down on her work. If they wanted her silence, they had chosen the wrong woman. The climax came 2 weeks later, when Hale himself broke his silence. He called a press conference, standing at a podium flanked by his lawyer and a handful of loyal supporters. Cameras flashed as he adjusted the microphone. "I have served this hospital for decades," he began, his voice steady, rehearsed. "And in that time, I have never let race determine my care. What happened that night was a tragic misunderstanding, twisted by those who wished to advance their own agenda. I am not a racist. I am a doctor." The crowd murmured. He raised his chin. "And I will not let my reputation be destroyed by false narratives." Maya watched from her office screen, her jaw tight. He was rewriting history, painting himself as the wounded one. It was infuriating, but it was also expected. This was what systems did when threatened. They fought back with denial, with deflection, with lies. But he made a mistake. A journalist raised her hand. "Dr. Hale, records show black patients under your care consistently waited longer for treatment than white patients. How do you explain that?" Hale faltered. His lawyer leaned in, whispering. He cleared his throat. "Statistics can be misleading. Correlation does not equal causation. I treated patients based on urgency, not race." Another voice cut in. "So are you saying Dr. Carter's account is false?" The question hung in the air. Hale hesitated. His eyes darted, searching for the right words. And in that hesitation, the mask slipped. He sneered, just slightly, and muttered, "She's exaggerating." Playing the race card. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras zoomed in, microphones shoved forward. But Maya wasn't listening to the noise, she was watching his face. That moment of contempt, that flash of arrogance, undid him more than any statistic ever could. By the next morning, the clip was everywhere. The phrase "playing the race card" trended for days, dissected and condemned. His defenders shrank back, his allies retreated. For the first time, the tide turned undeniably. The state medical board moved quickly. Within a month, Hale's license was revoked. His career, his identity crumbled. He vanished from the hospital, from the city, from the headlines, swallowed by the consequences he had tried so hard to deny. And Maya? She endured, bruised, scarred, exhausted but standing. Yet victory didn't taste sweet. It tasted like ash, like the ghosts of every patient who hadn't lived to see this reckoning. Hale's downfall was not the end. It was only a door opening, and beyond it stretched endless work. So she built. She created a task force within the hospital, composed of doctors, nurses, patients, community members. They reviewed cases, reshaped protocols, restructured training. She fought for transparency, for accountability, for humanity. And slowly, painfully, the culture began to shift. One evening, months later, she stood outside the ER again. The same doors, the same hum of lights. But something had changed. A young black mother rushed in, holding her feverish child. The triage nurse, an older white man who had once followed Hale's example, rose immediately, ushering them back without hesitation. No questions about insurance. No delay. Just care. Maya felt tears sting her eyes. It was a small moment, almost invisible. But to her, it was everything. Later, she gathered her staff in the auditorium. The room buzzed with energy, some hopeful, some skeptical. She stepped onto the stage, the spotlight warm on her face. "We are not perfect," she began. "We never will be. But perfection is not the goal. Humanity is. Every patient who walks through our doors deserves to be seen, to be heard, to be treated with dignity. That is the oath we took. That is the oath we will live by." The room was silent. Then, slowly, applause began. Tentative at first, then stronger, until it filled the hall. Maya closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. Not as triumph, but as a promise. A promise that the fight was not in vain. After the applause faded, she stood alone in the empty hall, the golden light of the setting sun streaming through the windows, casting her in a glow that felt like both ending and beginning. She thought of that night, of Hale's cold eyes, of the stretcher wheels squeaking against the floor. She thought of her own whisper, "You will regret this." And she realized she hadn't meant revenge. She had meant revelation. He regretted, not because of punishment, but because the truth had been dragged into the light, and light always burned those who thrived in shadow. Maya smiled, tired but resolute. The battle against racism was endless, bigger than her, bigger than this hospital. But for once, she had proof that light could win. And as she stepped into the fading day, the golden rays wrapped around her like armor, she whispered, not for herself, but for those who would come after. "We are not invisible. We are not disposable. We are human, and we will be seen." The doors closed behind her, but her fight remained open, a beacon that would not dim. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.